Thank you, Janine. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you today. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to give you set the scene, I suppose you could call it, before moving into one of these more dreaded online presentations again. Won't it be lovely when we can all actually see face to face and sit and have coffee and enjoy each other's company? My career started back in 1964 when I left school with just 5 GCE O levels. I moved from London down to Southampton to start a new job, and that job was as a trainee salesman within a builders merchants group. Real glamour stuff. I remember it was the coldest winter on record, if I think 1964, and unfortunately my job that they felt was really, really critical to becoming a super salesman was to fit barrow wheels, steel wheelbarrows that were icy cold out in the yard, and we had to put wheels on them. And that seemed to go on for an eternity. I was living in those days in something that was called digs. And I had to share a room with a welder from the Clyde who was working in Southampton docks on many of the liners that were there in those days. The glamorous world of Formula One never appeared on my radar at that time. So what happened to change that? Well, we're going to have a look in a minute at the presentation and we'll answer that question. I'm often asked how I managed to build a successful 45-year career in the exciting world of Formula One and international motorsport without having a rich family behind me. The answer is very simple. I managed it because I learned and developed the key skills that can help create a level playing field in a sport which is notorious for its voracious appetite of money and for having very, very wealthy family backgrounds being a prerequisite to becoming a top racing driver. The skills that I learned, and we're going to be talking about today, can be learned by anybody who wants to achieve their goals. They're not limited just to motor racing, please believe me on that, but they apply to whatever you want to achieve in life. I'm sure many of you will recognize them when we look back at a few of the key moments from my own career. The skills don't involve rocket science, believe me. With just 5 O levels, one of which was Latin, you can understand that I'm not the most technical person on the planet. But like so many things in life, even if we do know them, we often take them for granted and don't use them. So I'm hoping, working with you and talking today, you'll find it a subtle reminder of some of the skills that we all know, but don't use probably far enough. Right, let's now do a little technical bit and move across to the presentation. All right, let's go. So you don't have to be a champion to be a winner. It's more than just a title. It is a very strong belief that I have in life, that there are too many people today led to believe that unless you're a winner out there and get a medal, you can't be considered any good. That isn't true. In sport, there will always only ever be one real winner, but that doesn't mean that you can't be successful. And that's what we're going to look at. I mentioned to you that I lived in digs, and that was back in 1964, and I was working for the builders merchant. And in 1967, I was invited to Brands Hatch. Now, Brands Hatch is a motor racing circuit in Kent, for those of you who haven't heard of it. It used to stage the British Grand Prix and alternate with Silverstone circuit. I went along on this very cold day, and it was the first round of a new category of racing, which is not particularly important at this moment. It's called Formula Ford, but it became one of the really good junior formulas. And I stood on a muddy bank at Brands Hatch watching these cars going round, and I thought, wow, I'd like a share of that. I can see myself in one of those cars. But of course, I imagined that it was very expensive and it was way out of my league. And so it would be just a little dream for a while. And then in 1967, something happened that really shook the world of professional sport. Colin Chapman, who was the boss of the famous Lotus Formula One team in those days, saw that there had been a change in the rules allowing advertising on racing cars for the very first time. It was an opportunity, and he grabbed that opportunity and negotiated what became known as sponsorship with the John Player Tobacco Company. And his two drivers, Graham Hill and Jim Clark, raced that year in the Formula One World Championship for the first time in cars that looked like cigarette packets, the Gold Leaf brand in this particular case. Now, there'd always been racing, Formula One racing and racing cars, but they used to be painted in the colours of the country. So Britain, British Racing green, Mercedes, Germany, silver, France, blue cars, and Italy, of course, with the famous red. But now advertising, and it was an activity sponsorship that shook the world and caused a revolution in sport. A year later, I was a Xerox salesman. I'd met somebody who worked for Rank Xerox, and they said, look, Brian, instead of fitting wheels to barrows and going out there and getting freezing cold, why don't you come and use your selling skills that you've been learning in a company that pays very well, has fantastic equipment, and has a 3-week residential training course. And I joined that company, Xerox. And it was probably one of the greatest things I ever did for my dream to come true, because suddenly I started making money. And I was thinking, wow, with sponsorship, which I've been reading about and learning a lot about, and my income, I think I might be able to afford to go motor racing. So things started to look up, and my professional selling skills took me to companies out there selling the very expensive photocopiers, printing machines, and so forth. And it meant that I could start saving money. And then an opportunity arose. One day I was driving down the A20 in Maidstone, and I saw this sign at the side of the road: Victoria's nightclub opening on Friday the 15th of May, 1974. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, and carried on to my meeting. Later that evening, my mind went back to that board, and I decided to make a few inquiries. And I found that they were having a lunch on the 15th of May, a big business lunch, and they were going to invite a lot of the top businessmen from the region around Kent and Maidstone in that area. And an opportunity went through my head, and I thought, wow, I've got to do something about this. I've been looking to buy one of these low-price Formula Ford racing cars, a second-hand one, with the money I was making at Xerox. But I decided that I'd try something new. I went to the guy who had the car that I wanted to buy, and I said, can I borrow it for a day? And he said, what do you want to borrow it for? I said, I want to put it on a trailer and take it somewhere. So he said, as long as you don't take it off the trailer, of course you can. So I went to Victoria's nightclub on the day of the lunch. I got there about half an hour before I heard that it would be starting. And I drove the car and parked it with the trailer and the racing car on the back in the middle of the car park. Walked into reception, and I said, can I see Mr. Gorkoff, please, who I'd found out was the owner of the club. And they said, what do you want to see him about? I said, I'd like to talk to him about a business opportunity. This guy walks out, and I'm not joking, he was 6'8", 6'9" tall. And he didn't look very happy when he came out. He walked over to me and he said, is that your something racing car parked on that trailer in the middle of the car park? I've got a business lunch on, and I've got all these people coming out, arriving now, and you're parking right in the middle of the car park. Take the, and he described the car in even worse words, away. And I said to him, look at all the people now arriving. What are they doing? They're walking over to look at the car, because you don't often see a racing car in the middle of a car park at a nightclub. And I said, can you imagine if we had that car emblazoned in your very distinctive colour scheme and livery in the shopping mall on a Saturday morning in Maidstone, with a promotional person selling subscriptions and membership of the club, what it would do for your club? He said, get the F- car out of here, handed me his business card and said, come and talk. 2 weeks later, I had done my first sponsorship deal with Victoria's nightclub. It was the launch was held, and you can see in the photograph there, he is a big guy, and he put me under a lot of pressure. And I'm sitting there, and I went motor racing. and the first part of my dream had come true. I couldn't believe it. It was the start of a 45-year career in Formula One and international motor racing. And it came because I'd learnt how to become a professional salesman. And all the things that I've achieved in my career, whether it's driving, the business side of the career, whatever I've been doing there, the one thing I will never let anybody tell me is that selling is a dirty word. It is not. Selling is so important in life. Everybody has to sell themselves, whether it's at a job interview, whether it's at a promotional board, or whether you are even asking somebody out on a date. You're selling yourself. So please do not think that selling starts at 9 o'clock in the morning if you work in a business, and 5 o'clock in the evening it stops. What I did was to apply the professional selling skills that I'd learned at Xerox, and I applied them to the business world of Formula One and international motor racing. And it helped, and it worked. And I'm living proof of it. Here I am, 75 years old, and I'm still in the business of international motor racing. We've had 16 months of change. Some of us were talking earlier before I started the presentation about the problems of working from home and the missing of social reaction and activities and so forth. It has been a tough year. It's been a very, very tough year. But I'm a great believer in one thing, that with change come opportunities. But the important thing, it's what you do with those opportunities that matter. For example, I could have passed the nightclub sign and done nothing about it. I was curious, and I actually put a deal together because I looked and I was presented with an opportunity, and I took that opportunity. I want to talk about another opportunity that came up in my life. I decided to go and visit my folks. They lived in Johannesburg, and it was the winter now. I'd stopped racing for the season, and booked a ticket to fly down to Johannesburg. And I had a phone call from my parents to say that they'd managed to get me a ticket for the South African Formula One Grand Prix at the Kyalami Grand Prix circuit. I booked the flight and headed off to South Africa, reading a magazine about motor racing, not surprisingly, on the way. And somebody next to me said, "I see you're reading a book about motor racing." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you do any?" And I said, "I've just started racing Formula Fords." And he said, "And where are you heading now?" I said, "I'm going to Kyalami." He said, "Well, that's amazing." He said, "Here's my card. When you get there, come and see me." Who was that man? It was Max Mosley, who went on to become the president of the FIA, the governing body of motorsport worldwide, and who at that time was the director of the March Formula One team, one of the teams that took place in the Formula One World Championship. That was an opportunity, and I could have done two things. I went to see him at the Grand Prix. I introduced myself yet again, made sure I got his business card, and I came away. And as you'll see, it didn't pay dividends straight away, but my goodness, did it pay dividends later, and you'll see how. It was an opportunity, and it was one to be taken. I came back from Johannesburg and carried on with my own motor racing. And I had done a small deal with a mobile petrol station that they sponsored me in terms of fuels and oils and petrol, and also helped look after the car. And one day I was working on the car at the garage with my mechanic, and somebody pulled up at the petrol pumps, got out, and it was a businessman in a smart suit. And he walked over and, like a lot of people, took a look at the race car and said, "What's this all about?" I explained a little bit and told him what I was doing. And he said, well, good luck to you. I hope it goes well. And I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I work in a company called Kenwood, big food mixer group." I said, "Oh, really? What do you do?" He said, "I'm the sales manager for Sodastream, which was one of the brands that they sold." But he said, "We're in the middle of a management buyout, and we're going to take Sodastream as a brand in its own right." Guess what? Another opportunity. I rang Mr. Philpott, as his name was, and within the space of 3 months, I put together a sponsorship deal with Sodastream that gave them everything they wanted in all the different marketing reasons for the management buyout, brand awareness, opportunities, product sampling, all the things built into a proposal. I got the deal. We launched the program at the Tara Hotel in London, and I'd taken a big step forward because my dream was coming true. The deal was so big that it allowed me to take a salary and become a professional racing driver for the first time. However, despite all that money, you never have enough in motor racing. And one day I was sitting watching television. Now, some of you might remember on BBC television a program called Are You Being Served? Grace Brothers, the departmental store, Mrs. Slocum, John Inman saying, I'm free. You remember them? Well, it gave me an idea. I thought, you know something, the standard of people selling in retail stores is not that good. I'd had a discussion with some business people about that only a couple of weeks before this. So an idea came into my head, and I approached a man by the name of David Croft at the BBC. Now, David Croft, you might know, is the person who started and wrote Dad's Army together with Jimmy Perry. He also wrote Are You Being Served? He wrote other, Heidi High was another one of his, and many other very, very good comic sitcoms. And I came away from that meeting with the rights to produce training programs using the cast of Are You Being Served to make training programs for salespeople in stores. And I approached a company in London to do the production for me. We recorded with the cast of Are You Being Served at the Redwood Studios in London. They were owned by Michael Palin, ex-Monty Python. And in the process, one day I was at the studios, and Andre, the studio director, said, Brian, while we're recording the Are You Being Served stuff, you might like to pop upstairs. Some of the Monty Python guys are there. Well, I went upstairs, walked into the room, and they'd obviously been prepared, and they turned around and said, hello, Brian. And they were sitting at a piano. And they said, we're just writing a song about you. And of course, they were doing the music for The Life of Brian, which you may remember very, very well. And out of that, I got a meeting with John Cleese. And I was asked by him if I would write a script for one of the films that his company called Video Arts, a training film company, would make. And so things moved on, and it gave me a little bit more money to work with. But it was a fascinating experience. And once again, it was an opportunity that came from my approach and interest in selling as a professional skill. However, my racing skills on the track were probably not as good as they should have been. And it became pretty obvious after about 3 years that I wasn't going to make it to Formula One. I still wanted to continue. I wasn't that bad. I was getting quite good results, but not good enough. And I decided to go to South Africa and see if I could do some racing out there, go and spend a couple of years with my parents, look around the country, do some sightseeing and so forth. And I arrived in South Africa, and I saw that the Kyalami Grand Prix circuit was for sale. Yes, a Grand Prix circuit for sale. Doesn't happen very often. And so I put a phone call through to somebody who had sat next to me on a plane all those years ago, 5 years ago. And I'd taken his business card, you may remember, at the Grand Prix. And I said, Max, it's Brian Sims. I don't know if you remember me. We met on a plane. And he said, yes, I do remember, Brian. I said, the circuit's for sale. What's happened? He said, well, it's actually been sold. Why do you want to know? I said, well, Max, maybe I can get involved, get a job there, do a little bit of race instructing or something like that. So he said, leave it with me, Brian. I'll find out. Next morning, I got a phone call from a guy called Bobby Hartsleaf. And he said, Brian, I'm the new owner of the Kyalami Grand Prix circuit in South Africa. Max Mosley has phoned me from England and said I should see you. How do you fancy a coffee this afternoon at the Kyalami Ranch Hotel next to the racetrack? We'll have a chat. Well, that's what happened. I went in at 4 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock, I came out as the manager of the Formula One Grand Prix circuit in South Africa. Opportunity from those 5 years ago, from that meeting. And just to prove it, and please, if you don't like to see long hair, please turn away. It was taken in 1980 when I was announced to the world in South Africa that I was now the new manager of the racetrack in South Africa. Extraordinary, couldn't believe it. But the first bad thing came along into my life. The Grand Prix in South Africa was called off at the last minute because of a driver's strike led by Niki Lauda. Wow. Can you imagine the build up to this? We had 60,000 spectators had come up from all over South Africa, Angola, Rhodesia, all those places to watch the Grand Prix. They were not going to be happy bunnies if they were when the Grand Prix was cancelled at the last minute. And the drivers went off, slept in a hotel on mattresses. Luckily, the Grand Prix eventually did take place, but it was a real baptism by fire, as you can probably imagine. Kyalami then ran into some noise problems and stopped operating for a while. And I decided that it was time to do something different and go back to racing. And I managed to get a job with Honda, who had just announced that they were going to be selling in South Africa, manufactured, believe it or not, by Mercedes-Benz. And I persuaded the dealers that I would be the sales manager of the company of Honda in Cape Town, but also let's put a race car on the track. And I managed to win the championship in my first year. And so I was able to build quite a nice racing career. And then went on for about 5 or 6 years. And then eventually the day came when I was given the drive opportunity of my life to drive what they call a Le Mans Group C sports car powered by a Formula One engine in the last ever race to take part on the big Grand Prix International circuit in South Africa before it was modernized. And I put together a very big sponsorship and ended up driving in this particular race alongside people like Derek Bell, Jochen Maas, Jackie X, and so forth. And decided that was time probably to pull the curtain down on my racing career. But what it did was to present another opportunity. It presented an opportunity of a very different nature. And I realized that in South Africa, for young people coming through, particularly for young black kids and youngsters, it was very difficult to get into motor racing. Like anywhere, it's always expensive, but it was particularly difficult there. And so I went out and managed to get huge sponsorship. I took the opportunity and created a racing driver school, the first ever in South Africa. And it was called Kyalami Speed International. And we had PG Windscreen Group and Ford Motor Company sponsored the school. And it became really, really big. And I ran that successfully for 4 years. And then one day, my phone rang. And it was one of the drivers I'd raced against in England, who was now the managing director of a company called Lola Race Cars. And he said, Brian, we are going into Formula One this year with our own car. And we'd like somebody to come and handle the marketing and sponsorship side for the team. Are you still as good as you used to be when you were racing in Britain at getting sponsorship? Because if you are, get yourself on a plane, you've got a job. And I became the marketing and PR director for Lola Race Cars. Things were moving on because of these professional selling skills. And my career was really moving in a direction that if you'd have asked me all those years ago, to get to Formula One and be the marketing director of a Grand Prix team, I'd have said, no way, not going to be able to do that. But it just goes to show that if you grab opportunities, you never know what's around the corner. The driver that year, for those of you who follow Formula One, was Michele Alboreto. Sadly, the car was a bit of a disaster. It wasn't a successful season, and Lola pulled out the following year. And that meant that, from my point of view, I was out of a job. However, something happened while I was at Lola. Max Mosley and Bernie Eccleston, who you see there, would you buy second-hand cars from those two people? Max and Bernie had decided that they were going to make the Formula below Formula One. It was called Formula 3000, a single make formula, and get rid of a lot of the companies in the process who manufactured, made engines and brakes and chassis and everything else for it. And it led to a lot of worry through the motorsport industry as a sector, because they wanted to have more jobs, more growth and so forth in the categories, not reducing it in this way. And to cut a long story short, I went to see Max Mosley, and I said, look, Max, this is causing the industry a lot of problems. Well, the first thing he said to me is, motorsport is an industry in Britain. Everybody talks about it, doesn't exist. There's no formalized industry. Secondly, if you want to do something about it, get everybody together and come back with some proposals as to how to change things, which is what I did. And I came up with the idea of starting a motorsport industry association to represent the companies that operate in the what was regarded as a world-leading industry. And I saw another opportunity and set up the Motorsport Industry Association, which in 2004 was 25 years old. And we managed to get our industry awards program at the House of Lords. And the MIA today is become one of the most powerful business organizations in world motorsport. And I'm proud to be one of its 4 honorary life members for having started the organization. But it wasn't really my cup of tea to run an association like that. And I got another phone call from a man called Alan Pascoe. Now, some of you might remember Alan. Alan Pascoe was the man who started API, but he was the captain of the British Olympic team in the 1980s. He was a 400-meter hurdler, silver medalist in the Olympics. And he ran a big sports marketing agency. And he said to me, Brian, we've just signed a deal with the Benetton Formula One team to be its sponsorship agency. And we need somebody who can come on board and get sponsorship quickly, because we've put down a £500,000 guarantee of money that we're going to get the deals. And so, would you be interested? Well, you know the answer to that question. I was on went up and met with Alan, and we signed the deal. And then it was out on the road, so to speak. It was a hard sell, because to go and find deals straight away, they take time. But within a very short space of time, an opportunity came along. The Benetton team said to me, look, Brian, we are going as a marketing department to present to Gillette. We go every year and we never seem to get anywhere. Would you like to come along and watch? So I took the opportunity to go along with them. And I watched the presentation and I thought, I'm going to learn so much from these people. I didn't. I sat there. I was so saddened by what I saw. It was a very poor presentation, appealing to one thing and one thing only, brand awareness. And Risto Myler, who was the European marketing director for Gillette, was in the room and they were doing the presentation to him. And I made an excuse and stayed behind afterwards. And I said, Risto, you look bored during that presentation. He said, Brian, every year, every Formula One team literally comes to Gillette and presents some pictures with bigger and better pictures of the race car, all painted in Gillette colours. We don't need more brand awareness. We've got all the brand awareness we need. And if we did need more, we wouldn't do it on a racing car. Believe me, there are better ways of achieving it. So I said to him, Risto, can we meet up in a week or so and spend an hour just talking about some of the issues that face Gillette, and see if we can find some reasons why you should be in Formula One and how it might be able to help you sell more blades, more products, and so forth. And the outcome of that meeting was that I walked away with a £5.5 million deal, not literally at that moment, but I went away, and what I did was to forget the idea of branding on the car, and we designed instead an opportunity to give them the rights to make a lifestyle documentary series on television, the lifestyle of a Formula One team, looking at what it was like to be the marketing director, what it's like to be the person working on the pit crew, what it's like to be the trucking, what's it like to be the person organising the shipping of the cars, the logistics, the passports, laundry and everything else. And we got that and sold that idea to ITV in Britain, and took it to Sportel, the big sports conference, and offered every broadcaster who was prepared to show that series live on a midweek during the Grand Prix season that they would get it for free from Gillette, provided they gave Gillette top, tail and middle advertising slots for free. And we showed Gillette that they could save over £12 million on the budget they spent for TV product commercials as a result. And we did the deal, and it took 3 months from beginning to end. I also approached DHL. I approached several of the logistics companies and became very, very upset when I had a deal worth £15 million on the table from DHL, but the timing was wrong. They wanted to do it and stall for a season, which was rather sad for me because it would have then been the biggest non-tobacco deal in Formula One. So not everything works out first time, which is why I'm glad I also went to FedEx, because I pitched the same proposal to FedEx and did a lot of research and eventually signed a deal with FedEx, which was publicized in very, very interesting ways, for £15 million. And remember, tobacco sponsorship was on its way out. And this was the first of the new era of sponsorships that will be coming into Formula One. And in the process, I flew over to Memphis. I met Fred Smith, the man who started FedEx. And he said to me, the first things he said, what would it cost to buy the Benetton Formula One team? But enough of that. That's not why we're here. So once again, those professional selling skills had come to the fore. And there is a photograph there. If you don't believe me about the deal, there's Flavio Briatore himself, the boss of Benetton at that time, and Paul Evans and Bob Elliott, the two directors of FedEx. They stayed with them until they moved off to Ferrari. I then left Benetton because Benetton sold out in 2001 to Renault, and I decided to have a break. And I was asked if I'd join the advisory board of Oxford Brookes University, which I did, and thoroughly enjoyed it. I became an associate lecturer there, teaching sponsorship at the university. And it really was a fascinating time to be there. I was able to bring in two very big partners to the university. Dallara, the world's largest racing car manufacturer, and Porsche Carrera came on board as partners of the university. I then was asked if I would be a guest lecturer for the World Academy of Sport, which meant I would go over and teach my sponsorship skills in places like the International Cricket Council in Dubai, World Rugby in Dublin, the Bahrain Olympic Committee, Ford Motor Company, and really the combination of the skills that I developed, selling and sales training, all came together, and still in the sport that I was passionate about. I've written books on the subject, and I've been a very, very lucky young man in a way, because I'm still in that sport today. I'm a great believer that you don't have to be a champion to be a winner. I proved it. I wasn't a champion, but I believe I was a winner from my point of view, because I was able to achieve my dreams. And remember, with change come opportunities. It's what you do with those opportunities that matter. Thank you all for listening, and I apologize for the glitch at the beginning. I hope it's been worthwhile for you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Brian.
Let's just go out of there.
If you do have a question, could I ask if you use the hands up function? For people like my father, if you look on the top of the screen, the top black bar, you'll see a little emoji with a hand. If you hover on there, you'll see that the hands up function. So who has got questions? Any questions? Well, I'll ask one while everyone's thinking about their great questions. So you spoke quite a lot about your involvement in motorsport, but I know that you've been involved in some other sports as well. Rugby?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. When first of all, are you hearing me loud and clear?
Yeah, we can hear you
Good.
loud and clear.
Fantastic. Yeah, when Benetton sold out to Renault, I decided that I needed a break from motor racing. And a friend of mine was the managing director of Leicester Tigers Rugby. And he said to me, Brian, why don't you look at rugby as a sport and get involved in sponsorship there? Well, to be honest, I'm more a football man than rugby. But he said, give it a go. There's a club called Bath Rugby, you might have heard of, owned by a man called Andrew Brownsword. He's just bought the club, and the professional era of rugby has now arrived. Why don't you go and talk to him and see if he could work with you? And that was the outcome. I became the head of marketing for Bath Rugby. And it was a bit of a risk, really, for me. But fortunately, within 6 months, I brought Virgin Mobile on as a very big sponsor of the club. And then, to my astonishment, the club was non-computerized. The accounts were done by hand. There was no online booking of seats or anything like that. And so I brought Northgate Information Systems on as a company, IT company, and worked there. And it was interesting. And do you want to hear a really bad story about rugby?
Always.
It's rugby. This is a lousy one. It's clean. Don't worry, it's not bad. It was quite extraordinary in as much that I decided that I went to the Players' Awards. Now, in those days, Jeremy Guscott had just left. Mike Catt was there. Ian Balshaw, Mike Tyndall. Who would have thought he ended up in the royal family? My goodness. And I went to the Players' Awards, and I don't think I've ever been to such a boring, crusty affair. And so I spoke to Andrew Brownsword, and I said, look, why don't we commercialize this? Why don't we bring together the clubs in the west of England? And I went to the guy who owned, Tom Walkinshaw, who owned the Arrows Formula One team, also owned Gloucester Rugby. So I went to Tom, I went to the Malcolm Pearce, the owner of Bristol. And I said, why don't we, the three clubs, put on a gala evening at the Hilton Hotel in Bristol, a celebration of rugby in the west of England, incorporating the three clubs' player awards evening, and make a real big evening of it. We'll get it on television. We'll get sponsors for it. And he said, that's a great idea. And I put a sponsor ready together. We got the television, HTV, coming to film the whole thing. And I got a phone call from the trustees of the club, who still own 25% of Bath. Bath had now gone professional. And they said, look, we're not happy. We understand that you're going to commercialize our club awards. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but, someone's got to pay the wage bill now for players. It's a professional game. And my job here is to bring money in. And so they said, well, we don't like the idea at all. If you have to have this wretched event, can we ask a question? Could we please make it an all-male affair? Now, this was 2001. And I said to them, no, we can't. I said, you just don't do that. He said, why not? I said, well, first of all, I'm not telling Jeanette Thompson, the brand manager of the sponsorship that I've got for this, that she can't come to her own event evening. Secondly, I'm not going to tell the players that they can't bring their wives and girlfriends along. And thirdly, it's 2001, not 1891. And then this is the line that they came out with that decided me to go back to motor racing. They said, well, Mr. Sims, you're obviously a marketing man, very good with words. What if you were to put something on the tickets to say women accepted but not welcome? And I couldn't cope with it. I really couldn't. And so David Clayton was the CEO of Leicester, who are a very commercial club. Bath at that time most certainly wasn't. But so that's the answer. Yes, I did spend time in rugby.
Excellent. And I have one other question. Well, sort of a question. Yeah. So I've known Brian for quite a few years, and I think Brian probably gave me one of the best compliments I've ever received. He said, Janine, you're like me. You're like a rat up a drain pipe. And and it's always stuck with me. I'm so grateful you gave me that comment. But, I mean, you make sales seem quite easy, but I'm sure you faced more rejection than you faced wins. So what advice would you give to somebody who might be struggling with the rejection side of sales and marketing?
Goodness gracious. Yeah. To be honest, one of the problems I find, so many people, particularly I get a lot of young racing drivers and their parents looking for sponsorship, but also I keep very much involved with the business side of things and talk to business people about selling. A couple of things. First of all, I would advise anybody in sales who wants to make it their livelihood to really work on their communication skills, written and oral. It is so important. I see so many bad proposals written to companies, very bad phraseology, spelling mistakes, and just not have any power of persuading people in the written word. And it's the same in the visual. Secondly, I developed a method of getting to the right people in companies. That's half the battle. You can get into what I would call middle management of a big company, and you will not meet people who have any decision powers. If you can get to the managing director, the chairman, the CEO, whatever the title they have, that level, a director of the business, and you can show them that you can look at ways of helping them sell more products or more services in a proven, sustainable way, there's usually a conversation to be had. And that is the one thing that I've learned over the years. I've been lecturing to students at Brooks University and different sports associations. And I say to them, I'm an old man now. I've been around the world and done a lot of things in my life, and a lot of things have changed. And I asked them, what do you think has changed in my lifetime of business? And of course, the hands go up, and it's, well, the internet, calculators, all manner of things. And then I asked them the more difficult question. I said, what do you think hasn't changed in the 45 years that I've been involved in the business world? And that's a more difficult question. They want to be polite. They look at me and they say, I think, Brian, just about everything's changed since you came on the scene, all those years ago. And I said, no, the one thing that never changes in a company is the need to sell more products or more services. How they change, how you do that has changed dramatically, and it always will. That will go on progressing. But if a company doesn't increase its market share, doesn't sell more products, more services, doesn't hang around long. And so that's where the conversation lies. Too many people go into companies and tell the company what they need, instead of listening, asking a question, listening, and then trying to find an answer that helps them in that respect. And that's really all I've ever done. It's not rocket science. I always look upon it. If I had to go out selling every day, I think I'd have shot myself a long time ago. I go out to try and help companies solve problems through what I have in my briefcase. And for the last 30 years of my life and 40 years of my life, whatever, it's been motor racing sponsorship. But sponsorship is only good if it helps a company in a measured, proven, sustainable way sell more products and more services. People make selling so complicated. It isn't complicated. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And then some. I think Tim's got a question. Tim is my boss.
Wow, Tim.
Yeah, hi, Brian.
Wow, Tim. You've got a few stories to tell on then, I'm sure.
Well, Janine certainly keeps me on my toes, let's put it like that. I mean, we've worked with Janine now. We've been lucky enough to have Janine in the business for probably just coming up to 12 months. And I think the energy, the creativity she brings to our business is fantastic, and it really helps with what we're trying to achieve. But I just really enjoyed listening to you, actually, first and foremost. I think it sounds like you've had an incredibly interesting career, probably described potentially as a slightly unconventional career, but obviously the motivation was always there behind the scenes for what you ended up doing. I suppose I'm just interested, a simple question. I mean, do you have a single favourite role or experience that you had from within your career, your 45 years career?
A single one.
A single favourite.
Meeting my wife, who has been the most amazing support to me. Growing up in South Africa, she had 3 brothers, or a twin and 2 brothers, and rugby was the sport. And when she met this man from the motor trade, as her brothers called it, a guy in motor racing, she never realized that it would mean working in a motor racing school, going out on the track with a video camera, being taken around in cars, filming lines through corners and so forth. And to have to work in that era, to go into Formula One and meet some of the complete and utter, I won't use the word, but there's some very strange people in Formula One who really are beyond belief. And to have to work in that field is very, very difficult. So seriously, that was one of the most amazing things that happened, to have a wife who's been with me 35 years and supported and lived in this ridiculous world in which I've lived, driving racing cars. On the business side, it beat even winning a championship in motor racing. And that was walking out of FedEx with a £15 million, not literally, but with a £15 million check, started from a cold call from my desk in London in the January, signed in the May, and on the car at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone that year. And to achieve that and drive that whole thing through, going to Memphis. And the thing that I didn't say in the little presentation is that I got that meeting by writing an email with 3 very powerful lines at the beginning. And that got me a meeting, coupled with my other method of getting into companies, which is in my book, if you might find it interesting to read. But the line read, last year, the Benetton Group of companies spent this amount of money on logistics and freight business. The other 42 companies with whom the team deal, from suppliers to other sponsors, spent an estimated this amount. I want to come and talk to you as to how we can get you an increased share of that business. And that got me a meeting. There was a lot of research done, obviously, but that got me a meeting with the president of FedEx Europe, who then went and took me to meet the marketing director in Memphis. And as I said, we did that deal. And to walk out knowing, and having seen, they've got more aircraft than British Airways, FedEx, the most colossal company. And having met the man who owns still 9% of it, Fred Smith. What a name, Fred Smith, the man who started FedEx. And that was something I'll never forget.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure. Now, I must say a word about Janine. When I wrote my book, I'd written several books, but on the topic of sponsorship. When I wrote this book and got to know Janine, it was quite extraordinary when she said to me, Brian, she said, the first person who has, I think, ever in the publishers ever heard of the Kyalami Grand Prix circuit, and I would have come to see you race. My dad took me to Kyalami, and it made me feel about 137 years old. When you said that. But she's amazing, and it's so sad that she's not at the publishers, because their marketing department has just gone downhill since she left.
Well, we're very lucky to have her. She doesn't need to go back.
But thank you, Janine, for inviting me, and I apologise for the thing. I don't know what happened there, why it didn't go, but that's the life, that's the world we live in at the moment, isn't it?
Gremlins in the machine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming along. I will share this recording with you as well, Brian, if you want to put it out anyway. That's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for joining, everyone, and I hope you all have a good weekend.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, a safe journey back home to all of you, or if you are at home, a safe weekend. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Brian. Cheers.
Thank you,
Bye,
Brian.
everyone.